Wow, a great
Yep.
opener.
Yeah. Well, mostly just 'cause of, the, flaming dumpster pile that the series was left in. It's just so interesting that, like, before Disney started making their Star Wars movies, which I liked most of them, for the record. It's just so interesting how, like, Star Wars was this universally loved thing, and then just more and more as the Disney, it was like the sequel movies came out, it just people started to hate them more, and I just thought
With
it was interesting.
the very first thing for the new series, how it was almost shot for shot and thematically a recreation of 4, it just
Yeah.
really
I
lost
see,
me with that.
that never bothered me that much, to be
Well, I
honest,
think
like.
when Force Awakens came out, people were mostly just there for the ride. Like it's the first new piece of Star Wars media in over a decade of like a movie. Not really of new media, but it had been a while. It was fun to see like the time period of after the rebellion, and instead of going like back, we're going to the future. It's actually a sequel. So it's kind of just fun to see everything happen. But as time went on with the sequel trilogy, they kind of stayed pretty samey, and the writing
Well,
issues showed.
I think everyone's problem is that, like, they didn't stay that samey. Like, at least in the case of Last Jedi, it tried to go off script a lot, and I think that's what pissed a lot of people off.
Yeah, and I mean, so for people who don't have a lot of background on the new Star Wars trilogy, and I'll put a warning here. We're probably going to get into spoilers at some point.
Oh, we're definitely gonna get into
As of right
spoilers.
now, we haven't said anything too spoilery, but soon it's going to be spoilers. So I think it's important to note the new trilogy was directed in a weird kind of way where they didn't have a plan for the full trilogy when they started filming. It was done by three
Oh,
different directors, which ended up being two different directors because Abrams was brought back after some dispute or something that happened with the other director. I don't know the background on it, but Abrams was brought back to film the last movie as well as the first movie. He was the director on the first Force Awakens, and then also the director on Rise of Skywalker. It was Rian Johnson. I don't know how you say his name. It's probably the same as mine, just Ryan
It, yeah,
Johnson.
it's just Ryan.
Just Rian Johnson was the director of The Last Jedi.
Right.
I still feel like there's still only so much a director can do if like a script is bad to begin with.
Well, so the scripts were also not written at the same time. That's a big part of it. Normally, when
And
you're writing a movie trilogy that's planned out as a trilogy that'll release like once every year, you have a plan or at least an outline of what every part of that trilogy will look like. And from my understanding of the new Star Wars, they didn't have that.
well, what's interesting is that you can tell that Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker were definitely written by committee. They were written by, like, a group of people.
Yeah,
But the interesting thing about Last Jedi is it was written by Ryan Johnson himself. Like, there was probably, studio suggesting ideas and, like, hey, maybe don't go that
it's like
far.
yeah,
But
there were definitely people okaying and not okaying ideas, but
but
no
you
one to
could t-
tell just like no.
yeah, but you could tell in a way that it was very much written by Ryan Johnson, I think, because it's definitely the most unique out of, like, if we're just looking at,
Yeah.
if we're just looking at the trilogy, we're gonna not even talk about the anthology movies for a second, but, like, even just within the trilogy itself, it's very unique in a lot of ways. Like, I think especially the way that it's shot and a lot of the writing and a lot of the decisions that was made, it's very unique, I think.
Yeah. I have become of the opinion recently that if I am to rewatch one of the new trilogy Star Wars movies, it would probably be The Last Jedi, just because of the fact that I think the directing in Last Jedi is some of the best. I don't like the movie a ton as a second movie in a trilogy. I think that's my biggest issue with it. Is I feel like if that was the first movie of the trilogy, I wouldn't really have an issue because they're not tearing down a bunch of setup.
Do you feel that way
Yeah.
because of the movie itself, or because of how Rise of Skywalker completely ignored its existence.
No, I felt that way after Last Jedi came out.
Speaking of stuff that, um, I did see. I think I did see this. Um, it's really getting into spoilery stuff.
Alex, you are cutting out a little bit.
Okay. You guys hear me? Okay.
yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Um, sort of get into the spoilery territory, and this is me asking a question because I haven't seen the third one.
Do you
Did
care
anything
if we spoil
anything
it?
come? I don't care.
Okay, cool.
Did anything come of a sort of finding that Sith cave esque thingy? I feel like that was
Uh,
a one note thing.
I mean, to be honest, when Star Wars has like Sith caves, they're usually just to set up the idea that the character might be susceptible to the dark side. I don't think for Rey it was ever that serious. Because as much as they tried to play it off that she might join Kylo and join the dark side, nothing in the movie has ever really supported that.
Yeah. Well,
Including Kylo. Like, I don't know. It was a weird situation of I think that like that Force Cave scene kind of is, of all the Star Wars Force Cave scenes I've seen, I think the least impactful, but not necessarily because of the scene, just because of like it didn't really have a place to change anything.
I thought it was more than just like, oh, Rey's susceptible to the dark side, because it's her in like a cycle, right? And she's part of this cycle. And I thought maybe where they were going with it is that, yes, these Star Wars movies are kind of the same movie told over and over and over again. And because Rian Johnson was making so many different choices in terms of where the story was going and not a typical Star Wars movie, I kind of thought that it was him saying, hey, I'm breaking the cycle of like a traditional Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And that it would have ramifications later on. But again, people hated it so much that they completely just didn't even acknowledge its existence from that point onward. But
yeah, I don't even think it was not acknowledged because people didn't like it. I think it was probably just not acknowledged because the next director or writer did not really care about it. Like,
I there is definitely an aspect of like Disney being like, oh, people didn't like this movie, let's completely ignore it.
But I mean, the reality of filmmaking is you're recording scenes so far in advance of when it's actually coming out that I have a feeling some of the stuff, at least, I don't know if that was a scene that would have been recorded or changeable by that point.
I mean, the original script for Episode 9 was so different, though. Like, you saw the leaked script that came out.
Yeah.
It was so different.
What was it supposed to be?
It was, oh god, I don't even remember it anymore. There were some crazy concepts, though. I haven't sat down and read the whole thing in a little while. But
yeah, I've been meaning to read it, but I like heard that it was basically just kind of And like,
I mean,
from reading it, people were like, "Yeah, I can see why this was not what they went with."
Here's the thing: is that reading a script and actually seeing the movie in action are two completely different things.
Yeah, they're very different.
And so I hate when people judge how a movie would have been just based off of the script, because you can have really talented directors that take so-so scripts or even bad scripts and make something great out of it.
Yeah, and I think this was probably a case of there just being behind the scenes issues. Of like, maybe the filming wasn't going well, people weren't working well together, or they just weren't feeling it. Like, it might just be that script just wasn't what they wanted for Star Wars.
Right.
Which is, I think, a valid thing to do. Although, at the same time, like, it just ended up being that they retread so much ground with Rise of Skywalker that it really just doesn't feel like a complete trilogy.
Well, that was the biggest problem, is that despite, whatever you have to say about The Last Jedi, the biggest mistake that Rise of Skywalker made was not leaning into it more, because now it's basically doing the heavy lifting of two movies rather than just one, because it had to set up all this crap that no one had ever heard of and wasn't set up at all previously, and it was too much because it was trying to make up for a whole other movie.
Well, yeah, it's because these movies weren't connected in the way that they should have been. Like, there was that whole bit in The Force Awakens about Rey finding Anakin's lightsaber. and like that being an important moment, and then that just never comes up again. No one
Yeah,
ever brings up her like weird vision journey.
I feel like again though, if Last Jedi, keep the movie as was, but it had a different reception, I still don't think we would have gotten anywhere close to the movie we ended up getting, just because it was such a knee-jerk reaction to Last Jedi, you know?
Yeah. So I also think something we also wanted to cover is a lot of people have talked about the Star Wars movies, and the brutal truth of it is we're not going to do a better job than them in our limited time span compared to what most people have done.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say right now, if people want like a really detailed look at all the new Star Wars trilogy movies, check out the podcast Star Wars New Canon Book Club. It's run by Jesse Cox and a few of his friends. One of the guys from the Warp Zone, which is another like YouTube gaming channel thing.
I also suggest,
Very,
this
very good
this is
podcast.
this is brought up all the time, but Red Letter Media, they've covered, well, like it's just the
Yeah.
one guy, but he's covered almost every single Star Wars related movie ever. And each video is like almost the length of a Star Wars movie. They're insanely long.
Yeah.
And they're just so, but be warned, it's a very offensive kind of humor, and so you just got to be prepared to hear some pretty crazy stuff going into them. It's not for everyone.
Basically, the gist of it is this, despite all appearances so far, is not a film podcast. It's a
No.
weird variety podcast. So speaking
It's
of weird
whatever
variety,
we want to talk about.
let's
podcast.
talk about weird variety of Star Wars. So that's about as forced of a segue as I can do. So
forced.
Get it? Forced?
We're so good at this.
Star Wars puns. So many opportunities.
Hmm.
All right. So most of our experiences with video games. So I think that's going to be what we cap off this episode with is video game talk. So before we get to video game talk, I want to talk briefly about Star Wars TV shows. There's some TV shows. We got some old ones.
Yes, there are.
We have two, not one, but two Clone Wars TV shows. We have The Mandalorian, and we have Rebels. And if there's also Resistance, we're not going to talk about Resistance.
Isn't there this other one?
Nobody's seen Resistance. I haven't seen Resistance.
There's like this other one.
They do a bunch of Lego shorts.
Ooh. It was like a 2D animated thing. Maybe I'm thinking of
That's the Clone Wars. The original the Clone Wars.
Oh no. This is like
Galaxy
sequel
of something.
trilogy.
Yeah, it's Galaxy of things. I don't remember the name of it, but what that show is it's a bunch of shorts that animate important moments from all across the franchise. It's actually really cool.
Okay.
I
didn't like the
2
art
minute
style.
long. They're 2-minute videos. The weird thing is no one really knows who they're meant for because like they're kind of aimed at children, but they're weird and that like all these moments are just reanimated scenes from the movies. So like if you've seen the movies, it doesn't really serve a purpose, and like if you just watch these, you're not going to know the story of the movie, so it's not like a way to get around that. I don't know. It's weird. You also might notice we're not talking about Solo, Rogue One, or the other like Star Wars spin-off stuff right now. If anyone wants to talk about that, I don't know if any of you have even seen those.
I mean, I have.
Rogue One.
My thoughts on Rogue One differ from feels like almost everybody.
Okay, why don't we do Rogue One quickly? We'll get the movies out of the way first.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on Rogue One?
It is very, very okay. Like aggressively average is the way that I would describe
I feel like that's a lot of people's opinion on that movie.
No, people love it. Everyone I talk to absolutely loves that movie.
So I'll say I love aspects of Rogue One. I don't like the movie overall as like I don't think it's amazing. I think it's like a very solid on its own movie.
Mm-hmm.
But like in the greater whole of Star Wars media, it's not that special.
I wouldn't even agree with that because I feel like you really have to have a lot of context as to what Star Wars is.
Yeah, well, that's what I think is weird about it. The thing with Star Wars is it's in this unique position of most people, well, not unique, Marvel's kind of the same. Marvel and DC, actually, are where people know the basics about this, even if they're not really fans of it. So you can kind of have a story set in Star Wars that's just on its own. That still is interesting. But Rogue One does rely a lot on the setup of like the original movies, knowing what happened and like why this is important. And I believe they're also Cassian Andor is getting his own show, isn't he?
What? Really?
I think he's in the
What?
in the list of people to get a TV show for Disney Plus.
Of all the characters that
Well,
could
I
have a
remember because I
TV show.
heard the name Cassian Andor. I was like, who is that?
Exactly.
So I looked him up and was
That's-
like, oh, he's the guy from Rogue One.
And that is my biggest problem with Rogue One, is that to me, what carries a Star Wars movie are the characters, and these characters are absolute just planks of wood. They are total blank slates.
Yeah, I
they're
can't tell you the
so
name
boring.
of any characters in Rogue One aside from Jin because they used her name so aggressively in the advertising, and K2SO just because I played Jedi Fallen Order and there's a bunch of K2SOs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and also I remember K2 because he was the only, surprisingly enough, the robot was the only character with any kind of personality.
I mean, that's pretty common for Star Wars, though. A lot of the robot characters are usually played as like the gag characters that are pretty fun.
But they don't they don't out charisma the human characters.
Yeah,
though.
that's a good point.
There's no way that a single robot character in an entire Star Wars story should be the highlight. Like such a, I don't know. It was shocking to me that people love this movie as much as they do when there's no characters to really get that attached to.
Yeah, I do think Rogue One has the benefit of just being an entertaining, encapsulated experience. Of you can watch Rogue One and have a fulfilling time without needing to watch like a trilogy of movies or a TV show, because the characters have like their conclusions in that movie. So you get to see like the full character arcs. To be fair, there's not a lot of character arcs.
Not really that at all.
There's Force Stickman, who is probably my favorite character in that movie. I don't know his name, but he's entertaining. And actually, that's a good segue. I think our Rogue One talk's pretty much done. We don't really have terribly strong opinions on it. It's okay. It's all right. It's a fun movie if you haven't seen it. Watch it, but
the last scene, honestly, you can just watch the last scene and have a completely fulfilling movie watching experience, I guess.
That's actually a pretty good way of putting it.
Because let's be honest, all the other stuff leading up to that fight scene doesn't matter.
It's weird when you know going in that these characters are all all going to be out of the picture at the end because they're not in the original trilogy, and they're important enough to have been in the original trilogy.
I mean, you can, and this is my biggest thing too. I really hate how these anthology movies have to be based around something that was mentioned in other movies, whereas they couldn't just take, and that's what I love about Mandalorian, which is what we'll get to. They can't just create their own character and their own like scenario. They have to take something that was previously mentioned. It's like, oh, okay, we'll have a whole story about how the rebels got the plans, or we're gonna make a whole Han Solo movie. Oh, we'll have it be about the Kessel Run because he mentioned it for 2 seconds. It's like, you don't need to do that, and I really feel like they really tie their hands behind their back when they have to relate these movies to like things that were previously mentioned.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that's a good segue to talk about Solo. Solo is, in my opinion, the least remarkable Star Wars movie in any way whatsoever. It's not bad. It's not that good. It just kind of exists.
So I wasn't super excited to see it just because of all the behind the scenes stuff, and the trailers didn't impress me, but I was like, I'm gonna give it a fair chance, right? I hated it the first time I saw it. I almost walked out of the theater at the where he got his last name bit. I was like, I'm done. This is bad.
I forgot about that.
This is some double S tier trash. Like, this sucks. After watching it more and more, I'm lukewarm because I keep finding more and more things that I like, but I still can't bring myself to
I think Solo is just a good example of like a summer action movie. It's pretty average.
Completely disposable.
Yeah. Alex, did you see Solo? Oh, we've lost Alex. That's
Uh-oh.
unfortunate.
I was wondering why he was super
Yeah,
quiet over
Alex
there.
has been having internet issues, so if he cuts out, that's why.
Poor guy.
So
Oh,
yeah, we can basically move on from Solo. Solo's not that important. It's a fun watch if you haven't seen it,
who cares?
but it's
It,
yeah. I mean, who cares?
it was too dark,
Han
literally
Solo is a
visually.
good enough character without that movie. You don't really need
Honestly,
another
well,
movie to make Han Solo cool. So
I think here's something that is interesting. I know we were just about to move on, but here's something that I've been thinking about. I feel like the reason this movie doesn't work that well is because they're covering a character before he was interesting.
yeah,
Like
that's a
Han
good way of putting it.
Han Solo's character arc was in A New Hope, and that's what made him a great character. But we're covering at him in a time we're looking at this character in a time where he's not that interesting and he hasn't had that arc.
Yeah, because he can't be the smuggler with a heart of
Oh,
gold
there he
when
goes.
yeah, there Alex just vanished from the Discord.
Oh,
That's all right.
that...
We'll get him back next week.
Okay, my internet's really funky.
All right, we got him back. Wow, we make a joke
There he-
about him disappearing, and there he is.
Can't get rid of him.
All right, Alex,
I am.
did you see Solo at all?
I did not see Solo.
Okay,
Ah.
well, for completely forgivable, let's move on from Solo. It's not that important.
Yeah.
While we're in, I think we'll tackle the Clone Wars as the last show because it's kind of the longest thing, and it's still relevant because it's going on. Alex, you watched some Rebels, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
What did you think?
As far as season 1 goes, so far,
Wow.
what?
Season 1 of Rebels is not very good. That's my opinion on it. I don't know if yours is any different, Alex.
Jesus.
The animation is, incredible because it's the first season of an
Yeah.
animated show, and characters are still,
It also has a
I'd like to think, getting their footing.
it has a weird art style too. Like
Yeah.
Clone Wars has that kind of painted look. Rebels has this weird fuzzy look to it. And it's definitely intentional because it's on everything. But I think the first season it's super noticeable.
It feels like a Disney, like, oh God, what did it remind me of? This is even just in color
I believe
palette or
Rebels
something
is
like
originally a Disney XD show.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought it would
Yeah.
look like.
So what also I've seen all of Rebels. Rebels season 1 is by far the worst season of Rebels. And it's not actively bad. It's just very milquetoast, like bland. It's a lot of setup for stuff that happens in the second and third seasons, which gets really cool. So for people that don't know, Rebels is the story of a like rebel cell before the rebel alliance is a thing. So the show takes place before episode 4. The rebel alliance doesn't exist yet, and the cool thing is that the show runs to the point where like battle over Yavin, I believe it is, happens. So you literally get to see over the course of 4 seasons like the lead up to the Rebel Alliance being created, and it's really cool. That's what I like about it. And there's also some Rebels has much stronger characters than any other Star Wars TV show so far. Debatably against The Mandalorian. I think The Mandalorian's giving it a serious run for its money, but I think The Mandalorian doesn't have the benefit of 4 seasons yet, so I don't know. I could easily see The Mandalorian becoming better in that regard, but we'll see as time goes on. Just because every single character in Rebels has a full character arc by the time season 4 is done, and they're all very interesting. And season 2 becomes a much more like planet hopping adventure than season 1, which they had to do on a much lower budget, so there's only one environment.
Which in some ways I actually quite like. That it's
yeah,
very
but the planet
strange.
it takes place on is not that interesting. It's Lothal. It's very like weird plains and like mountain humps.
Because I do kind of want more Star Wars content that isn't so like massively huge. Because I think that was another issue with that I had with Rogue One, where it's like they took
Yeah.
such a small story and they blew it up to this massive, like, Star Wars style scale. And it's something that works for Mandalorian too, is that it's very small scale, and I want more of that type of story in Star
Yeah,
Wars.
I think you would like Rebels, Wyatt. Um, Maybe not the first season, but the second season is very good, and you get to see a lot of like characterization for characters that don't exist in a lot of Star Wars. Like you see the Inquisitors who aren't in the main line movies, but are super interesting.
Good to see the.
Oh.
We lost him again. Yeah,
Oh
so
no!
the first season. Oh, there you are. The first season focuses on the Grand Inquisitor, who is pretty cool.
Oh, they showed up in Fallen Order, right?
Yeah. Fallen Order is before Rebels, maybe. I think Fallen Order takes place before Rebels. But you see a bunch of the other Inquisitors in Rebels. And
Gotcha.
yeah, it's a cool exploration of things that are not standard for Star Wars. Like doing the Inquisitor stories is really fun. And yeah, it gets to the point where you get to see the background of a lot of characters that are very different, and it doesn't tread the same ground that the Star Wars trilogies tend to do of like super weapon. Oh no, what's gonna happen? How do we fix it? It's a lot more character focused.
Gotcha.
And speaking of character focused, you don't want to know what show isn't? Clone Wars. All right.
Ooh. Ooh. Ooh.
It is now, but when it started, it wasn't. And I'm talking about the Clone Wars 3D animated show, not the 2D show. Mostly
2D
because
show's awesome.
the 2D show is
I
very fun,
yeah.
but it is now non-canon and not that great. Like the animation is a little weird. A lot of cool stuff happens though.
It's so much fun to watch. Like it's not like again, it's not character focused, which is like the big thing for Star Wars for me specifically, but damn is it fun to watch sometimes if you just want some cool fight scenes because it's done by the guy who did Samurai Jack.
Yeah.
So if you want some just cool action in Star Wars, on the level of like Rogue One is fun to watch for some fun action. It's a good watch, I think.
It's very fun, but it is like a small mini series type thing, if I remember correctly. It's not like a full season.
It's very. You can watch the whole thing in like less than an afternoon. It's really short.
Yeah. So the Clone Wars 3D show, it started with a Clone Wars movie, which we're not going to talk about because it's really bad.
It's bad.
I recommend if you have any interest in watching the Clone Wars, the only important scene in that entire Clone Wars movie is the scene where Anakin gets a Padawan, which is the first 5 minutes. The rest of the movie has no bearing on anything.
And honestly, if you know about the behind the scenes of that movie, it's not really the filmmaker's fault at all.
Yeah,
because
it's just not great.
No, it's they were forced to make a movie. They didn't want to. They didn't have the resources or the manpower to make a movie, from what I understand, but they had to as some George Lucas decree, from what I understand. So it just wasn't very good.
Yeah, it also takes place in a not very interesting setting. It's not like the Clone Wars miniseries had the advantage of being set during the Battle of Coruscant, which is just cool.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Clone Wars, the movie, was just weird. It's not great. The TV show, though, is also not fantastic, but it has its moments, and it has some really good moments.
You better watch your back after saying that. My goodness.
Look, I think most people that have seen the Clone Wars will agree that the show itself, as a whole, is not amazing, but it has episodes and story arcs that are some of the best storytelling in Star Wars. Like, all the clone-focused episodes in Clone Wars are amazing. Like, getting to see, like, basically this just military fiction set in Star Wars is really fun. And you see, like, this character progression. There's even this whole bit about, like, a conspiracy theory to figure out what Order 66 is. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So, something really cool. The current season of Clone Wars, which is airing after a long break on Disney Plus, and the final episode comes out on May 4th for Star Wars Day. We have just hit the point in the Clone Wars where you are concurrently seeing Order 66 with Revenge of the Sith happening, but from the perspective of characters on the sidelines in a different part of the galaxy, and from characters who are like super close to their clones. So it's a very different experience, and it's super dramatic. I'm not going to spoil what happens in it, because it is legitimately some of the best Star Wars episodes of anything I've seen. Like, Darth Maul's involved. It's really cool.
Huh.
It is a really good series of episodes that's been happening. Yeah, that's that talk. But the rest of Clone Wars has this issue where we know what happens to almost every character. The only exception is Ahsoka, and kind of Rex, which is I think why people latched onto those two characters as fan favorites. Is like they're the ones we don't know anything about, and they're also small enough that they could still be around after Order 66. So like people are like, oh, they could be alive. So we don't know they're gonna die in the show, which is a good setup that Rogue One didn't have.
So I haven't seen the whole show. I've seen a fair amount of episodes though.
Yeah,
And the two things that I will say is that I respect the hell out of the show because they gave the clones personality,
absolutely.
which the movies did not at
I mean,
all.
sideline, the voice actor for the clones, man, does an incredible job.
Oh yeah, I mean he has to voice so many characters.
He voices like almost every character in multiple episodes, like having
crazy.
conversations with each other constantly. It's very entertaining.
Yeah. So I'll give the show because it seems like you know I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound like a dick, but I feel like because I feel like people have been having more and more appreciation for the prequels over the last
Yeah.
couple years, and I feel like a lot of that is because of the show.
Oh, I totally
Giving-
agree. I
Giving
think
far more context.
a lot of, and the weird thing is the Clone Wars takes place in this very specific time period between episodes 2 and 3, that it's like this hyper specific time span is what people are attaching to, which is kind of weird. And yeah, I think my biggest advice for anyone who wants to watch the Clone Wars but hasn't is if you find an episode that you're not enjoying by like 5 minutes in, skip it.
You can do that?
There's some, so the Clone Wars is episodic pretty heavily. It does story arcs of like 3 episodes. And some of them are fantastic, some of them are horrible. There's an arc about Jar Jar Binks being mistaken for a Jedi.
Oh,
And while those episodes
what?
are
What?
entertaining, they're entertaining in the way of looking at it and being like, this is god awful for the entire time that it takes place. So
Because like that's not a good sign when you can just skip entire episodes in a show and
well,
haven't missed
it
anything.
is episodic in nature. So it's like, you know, The Mandalorian does the same thing a few times where there are episodes that don't have greater bearing on the plot, but they're
My
fun for
least
the
favorite
characters.
episodes.
The Clone Wars, it's just sometimes they do those episodes about characters that no one likes, namely Jar Jar. And those episodes are totally skippable because they don't matter.
Oh god.
But there are some fun original characters. There's some bounty hunters that are really cool. There's a story arc where Obi-Wan has to pretend to be a bounty hunter in a like battle royale situation. That's really fun.
What?
Yeah,
That
there are
sounds
some
bonkers.
really crazy cool moments with characters that people really like. Like you get to
Okay.
see a lot of Obi-Wan doing cool stuff during the Clone Wars. You learned Obi-Wan had a love interest.
I'm sorry?
Obi-Wan had a love interest and almost went down the same path as Anakin, but the love interest he had didn't ask him to. There was a line in one of the episodes where he literally says, if you had asked me to leave the Jedi Order, I would have in a heartbeat. And it's like, whoa.
isn't
What a hypocrite.
that Jedis have to be celibate?
Yeah, there no attachment, so no relationships.
Which was always weird. It never made sense to me, to be
Yeah,
honest with
and
you.
one of the great things about the Clone Wars is that is like Ahsoka's leading character moment in her like big episodes in I think season 4 or 5. She has a moment where due to circumstances she is like accused of a crime she didn't commit and expelled from the Jedi Order. And no one will believe her aside from Anakin. No one will believe her that she didn't do this thing. But Anakin believes her and is like trying to convince her to come back, and like they'll figure everything out. And then you learn at the end it is a plot by Darth Sidious trying to get her either executed or locked up to drive Anakin basically darker and make him like despair and have like basically easier to manipulate, right?
See,
Wow.
now that is so much more interesting
It's super cool. And then
than what we got.
so this is the spoiler bit. This doesn't really affect it because I think the lead up to this is what makes this moment interesting. But Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order.
Permanently?
Oh.
Yep. That's why when you see her, she shows up in Rebels, and it's like, wait a minute, you're not a Jedi, and she's like, nope, not a Jedi. It's really fun.
If you're not a Jedi, you can still use a lightsaber, though, right?
If you have a
yeah.
lightsaber, which is one of the cool things in Rebels. Ahsoka has a set of like white lightsabers that are super cool.
Well, hell yeah.
Some of the like coolest lightsaber designs I've seen. They're just very sleek. Yeah, they're cool. Ahsoka's a great character, especially in the later episodes in the new season, which is like really focusing on her. Because like she's the perspective character for the newest season. It's basically Order 66 from her perspective. It also just showed us like the whole siege of Mandalore, which is really cool. Yeah, and there's a lot of cool stuff. You get to see some great fights between Darth Maul and the cast, because Darth Maul is a pretty central villain in a lot of the Clone Wars. Yeah, but Clone Wars is definitely worth watching, but the quality of it varies drastically, and yeah, skip episodes you don't like.
Do you know why that is? Like, do they have different teams working on different episodes or something like that? Or
I don't know the background. I think it's pretty clear they did, and it's pretty clear when you watch a season of the Clone Wars, you can pretty easily tell where the money went. Like, there'll be certain episodes that are just animated better, and have a lot more care put into them, and then there are episodes that don't. There's also like the seasons vary pretty heavily in quality, but there are some cool subplots. Like you learn about Saw Gerrera, his first introduction is Clone Wars, and you see like that whole rebel group during the Clone Wars is they weren't rebels. They were the people of a planet that was taken over by the Separatists and needed to take back their independence. But the big thing here is it's a moral quandary for the Republic. They can't support the rebel group because this planet was taken over peacefully. So it's this question of like, is the Jedi Council able to like fund an insurrection morally? And it's kind of a good series of episodes where they're like, there's a moral debate over whether or not funding a like terrorist insurrection is the morally right path. It's played a little weird because Clone Wars is a kid show. Right? At its core, it's a kid show. Right. The weird part about that is the Clone Wars has one of the highest death tolls of any TV show I've ever seen. Because like you see ships exploding left and right. There are battles where clones like literally just go out, and then there's like just a sequence of like shots where a clone will die every shot, right? And it's like 20 shots to show like a battle being difficult or something. And you'll just be like, wow, that is a lot of death for a kid show.
Oh my god.
And a lot of it is like on screen. They don't pull many punches. Like there's a bit where Anakin literally impales someone with his lightsaber on screen.
Oh. Jesus.
It's really cool, but like there are moments like that in the Clone Wars where you go, wait a minute. This show's aimed at children? Like they're more violent than the new trilogy movies, I think. By a good deal.
Wow.
But yeah, I think after seeing Rebels, I actually think Rebels in my mind is a better show than the Clone Wars because it focuses on a core set of characters and follows them the entire time. Whereas Clone Wars is constantly bouncing between characters, and until the newer seasons, they really weren't focusing on the core cast.
Is this still the 3D animated Clone Wars that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Or is this okay?
The 2D one is like non-canon and not really in discussion because of that. Like it's hard to really talk about it when we don't know what is considered canon to Star Wars from it.
I think
it
should still be talked about on its own though. Like even if it's not canon.
They do actually. One of the latest episodes of Clone Wars, the new season that's airing on Disney Plus, they do kind of imply that the Battle of Coruscant still happened the way it happened. So it's cool. But yeah, it's really interesting. I think season 7 of the Clone Wars takes this like wild leap in quality, which is pretty obvious considering there's like a 6-year gap between the last season 6 and season 7.
As in good, right?
Yeah, it's very good.
Okay.
The issue is it's a 12 episode season. They spent 3 to 4 episodes on a plot that no one liked. So
Oh, okay.
Are you telling me they Game of Thrones the Clone Wars?
not really. They spent a few episodes on the subplot of like Ahsoka going on an adventure with these two like beaten down like smuggler type kids. It's not awful. It's just not the arc that you would expect to see in the final season of a show.
Gotcha.
But it's not like a bad bit of TV. It's just like very weird. And one of those 4 episodes is bad because they start in a prison cell and they end in the same prison cell. There's a whole bit where they go out of the prison cell and do a bunch of stuff, but at the end they're in the same prison cell again, and we're back to square one. Like, that episode was pointless. There was one shot of a Mandalorian to be like, hey, the Siege of Mandalore is about to happen. But that was it. So that episode, pointless. Completely forgettable. But everything else is pretty good. And there's also the first 4 episodes of it were like about a bunch of clones. It was a cool episode. Although I think a lot of people have different opinions on it.
The most annoying thing is that people are like, oh, why you gotta watch Clone Wars? It's like, yeah, I'd love to. If I had Disney Plus, I totally would.
Yeah, that is the kicker. Is most of the stuff is only available on Disney Plus. So now we've talked about the animated shows. How about Mandalorian?
Oh, Mandalorian.
I think everyone here likes the Mandalorian.
I
Like
love Mandalorian. Oh, it's
Scratches an
so
itch.
good.
Yeah,
So
it fills that weird like space western vibe
Mhm.
that I think there hasn't been much TV filling since like Firefly.
I was exactly going to say that the
Yep.
gap
Yeah.
in my heart is Firefly.
It's like just the outer rim, like fun planet hopping stuff.
I want to see more Star Wars related content that doesn't deal with the Force so much, because
That
I really
is
feel
part of
like
it.
because I mean it's not that I hate the Force or anything, but I feel like either the movies have completely missed the point or have really overused it as like a MacGuffin, as like a way
Yeah.
to get out of a way to get out of like crappy story plot points and stuff like that. And so I really appreciate whenever a show doesn't focus on it so much.
Is the point of the Force not just to be a MacGuffin?
Well, it's the problem is
But
that it's
mini
like you haven't
chlorians,
seen-
Alex.
Oh God!
because like again, either the problem is whoever's doing the story doesn't understand the Force at all, which was in the case of the prequels,
Yeah.
if you ask me, or it's just used as a really crappy plot device.
So actually-
and like it's always been a crappy plot device.
Something
but
fun with the Force
it's about.
is this ties into your point, Wyatt. I know you don't know about this because you haven't seen Rebels. Rebels retcons midichlorians.
What?
They retcon midichlorians. They don't say they don't exist, but they like reword what's said in episode 1 to make it fit a lot more with Star Wars. And it's basically just like midichlorians are just a measure of how immediately connected to the Force you could be. It like takes away all the scientific stuff and is just like, yeah, it's how the Force makes itself known. It's still stupid, but it retcons the worst parts about midichlorians.
I mean, that's definitely a step in the right direction. It's not like they can just completely ignore it at this point.
Yeah, they can't get rid of it because it was set in a mainline movie, but that is something fun that Rebels does.
Okay. So and like I was saying, you either get midichlorians where people just don't understand how the Force works to begin with, or you get something like The Rise of Skywalker that just uses it as the most cheap, lazy, stupid, like MacGuffin ever.
Skywalker used midichlorians?
I don't think they ever said the word midichlorians, but they came pretty close.
Oh God!
Well, and here's the other thing. So I'm gonna spoil. Are we going
Yes,
into
we're doing
spoilers?
spoilers. We are
Okay,
doing spoilers.
Alex, you don't care, right?
Is absolutely fine with me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Basically, so they introduced this concept in like the first third of Rise of Skywalker that Rey can use the Force to basically heal people.
Which is technically introduced in The Mandalorian.
It's not something that's I don't hate the idea on its own, but it's the way that it's used that I hate so much, because she uses it. What is it? So she uses it once to like heal that space worm thing,
Yeah,
so
she
they can
heals the
get this,
snake.
so they can get the dagger. Which honestly, I was kind of okay with that, because it was like a peaceful solution rather
Yeah, I
than
think
just
my only
violence.
problem with that scene is she implies she's like giving her own life force to the snake, which was a little weird.
Yeah, but again, I
Out of context,
huh
sounds
huh.
space worm and dagger stuff out of context to me
Yeah,
sounds amazing.
they had to find this dagger, so they went to this completely random planet, and there was a worm that was guarding it. It's really stupid.
Completely random
Anyway,
planet, but it's Tatooine, but it's a random planet.
it's
It's another
Tatooine. I
desert
mean
planet.
Jakku. I mean whatever the hell it was called.
Oh my
But like,
god.
but no, like honestly, I liked that scene because it's a very Jedi thing to do. Try and
Yeah.
find a solution to something that isn't violent. So that was fine. The second time she did it is when she stabbed Kylo and then brought him back to life.
Oh,
Um,
then
but even then, like there are parts of that thinking about it, I actually kind of liked, where like basically, because like essentially Ben, if she hadn't killed Kylo, he would have went out. By the way, I just call him Ken
Yeah,
because
Ken. Good old
Kylo
Ken.
Ken. But no, like if she just let Ken die, right? He would have gone out the same way as his father, and so bringing him back to life, I feel like was a really interesting kind of like wake up or like awakening moment for him. And so I thought that was actually a really interesting. It wasn't handled very well, but I feel like it
Yeah.
could have been really interesting. And then the last way that they do it is Kylo Ren brings Rey back to life at the end, and then he just dies. And it just at that point I was like, all right, you are now just using this as a way to like it's like a complete cop out at this point.
Yeah,
And
it's
the
weird.
force
They just go back and forth with it.
Yeah, and they do the same thing with Finn, where they hint at the fact that Finn is also force sensitive, as he's like, "Oh, how do we know the shield generator's on this one Star Destroyer?" He's like, "A feeling," and then they never touch on it again.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that was kind of done in the original trilogy too with Han. They're like, Han is force sensitive, but he's not like a Jedi force sensitive. He's just like got intuition, you know?
It wasn't nearly as lazy though,
Yeah,
if I'm being
I'll
honest.
yeah, I'll agree with
It
that.
wasn't a cop out, whereas this, it's like.
And I'll also say, while we're on the topic of Rise of Skywalker, my Rise of Skywalker contains one of my least favorite lines of anything I've ever heard, and 100% my least favorite line of Star Wars, even compared to stuff like Jar Jar walking in poop. This is the worst line in Star Wars. It is Rey saying, "I am all the Jedi." That is the worst line in Star Wars.
I forgot that. Oh.
It's good old
Oh.
Sidious goes, "I am the Sith," and then Rey goes, "And I'm all the Jedi." And it's just so bad.
I am.
And the
Alex.
wild thing is, you then hear the voices of a bunch of Jedi
It's kind of cool.
from
It
all
was
over.
stupid,
Yeah, but the thing is, like,
but
a lot of those people aren't dead. First of all, Ahsoka, we have no confirmation to be dead, and it's pretty much implied that she's alive at the time. I think one of the voices we hear is Ezra or Kanan, one of the two Jedi from Rebels.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and at that point, like, if it's Ezra, he's confirmed to be off in deep space somewhere, doing some weird shenanigans. And it's like weird. It's weird. It's such a weird scene because no one knows like who's alive and who isn't. It's weird. I
That-
get the sentiment, but it's weird. It's like, did Rey suddenly enter the Avatar state? I don't know.
Also, can we, while we're on the topic and while we're shitting on it, can we just talk about how apparently you can just suck someone's life force out of them?
Look,
What? What was that? What was that?
I feel like that's one of the things that I feel like if we had had a movie actually setting up Palpatine as a villain again, rather than this weird scenario of The Last Jedi didn't progress the plot of the trilogy, and then suddenly everything has to be introduced in the last movie. Like, I feel like that could have been handled better if it had been introduced prior. But because it had to be introduced in this movie, and the thing is, like, I don't actually blame Ryan Johnson. I keep saying Ryan Johnson for that. I think it was just like they should have had one writer for this trilogy because it would have made everything so much smoother.
Well, see that's what I hate is that like no matter how you feel about Last Jedi, I feel like it's really unfair to blame the state of Rise of Skywalker on it. Like
Yeah,
that's just
it's
unfair.
difficult. I
It's
mean,
just unfair.
it's just that like I think Last Jedi on its own is a good movie. It's just centered in a trilogy where it doesn't really fit. But the weird thing is like The Force Awakens also kind of doesn't fit. And then Rise of Skywalker fits the least.
Well, again, like because we have differing opinions on this, but in my opinion, I think all the pieces were put into place just fine until Rise of Skywalker. Like I felt like because people are like, well, I don't know where they're going to take these movies at this point, and I was thinking to myself, there's plenty of places you can take Rise of Skywalker in terms of like what to do with the
Yeah.
characters. I think I've talked about this before, but what I thought they were going to do was this really interesting. What I thought would have been really interesting is the whole point is that they set up the idea of this middle ground between the light and the dark, which is kind of where Kylo sits, right? Like that's kind
Well,
of
I mean,
that's one of the big
Gray
things.
Jedi are like a real thing in Star Wars, and nothing has touched on them aside from like maybe Ahsoka. But even then, Ahsoka's just a Jedi. She just doesn't say she's a Jedi.
But what I thought they were going to do was because they're clearly establishing, at least what I thought in my mind is they're clearly establishing three different factions at this point. You have the
Yeah.
Resistance and the New Republic, right? And then you have First Order with Emperor Palpatine. And then what I thought they were going to do was they were going to have this third party be Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren, and maybe have
Yeah,
like
I
a
thought
bunch of First
that would have
Order,
been really interesting.
and then have a bunch of First Order defectors, because that would have been, again, that would have touched on like this whole gray area that it clearly shows that Kylo Ren is going down. But again, it's something that people didn't like, and so they had to completely turn away from something that would have been really interesting.
I
Yeah.
remember one of my favorite Star Wars fan theories, and this is a little bit before Rogue One came out, was that the main characters in Rogue One wouldn't die, and they somehow ended up the Knights of Ren or whatever that is.
That's an interesting
Oh,
idea. I would have been down for that. Although I think a lot of why stuff like that doesn't happen is these movies were very much created by different people.
Yeah.
At least in like Rogue One's case being like very much its own thing. Yeah, I feel like Knights of Ren are basically spiritual successors to the Inquisitors, which is cool
sure.
because the Inquisitors are cool. But the Knights of Ren show up like 3 times.
Oh, it's
in
comical.
The entire trilogy.
So this entire trilogy, I'm like, I really want to get the Knights of Ren because they could
Everyone
be
wanted
really
them.
interesting. They
And
show
the thing
up
is,
in
they're
this
like
movie.
selling toys of them.
Yep, they show up in this movie, and all they do is they cut away to them basically alluding to the fact that they're following the heroes on their journey the entire time. And then they show up once at the end for Kylo Ren to fight them. That's it. It's
Yeah.
hilariously just poorly handled. It's pathetic.
Yeah, and I think what we're getting from this is that we're gonna have to do another podcast about Star Wars.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I think at this point it's pretty clear we're not gonna cover everything we originally wanted to because we're almost about at an hour already.
Oh my god.
Yeah, we've been talking for a while.
Hey, we
and
could
we have a lot
what
of
we could do-
opinions.
What we could do, make this a 2-parter, release an episode on the 3rd, and then second part of the episode on the 4th. Yeah?
We could
Huh?
attempt that. That depends on how much time we have. But yeah, what I'm gonna say is I think we can cap out our movie discussion, and I want to leave off the Mandalorian bit. I think we're going to talk more about the Mandalorian at some point.
Yeah, we kind of got off
because
the
there's
script
a
there.
lot. The Mandalorian has a lot to talk about.
Yes.
And what I'm actually really curious for is I want to see Alex's opinions on the Mandalorian after he's watched Rebels.
Ooh.
Because
okay.
Rebels also has a lot of Mandalorian culture in it. And the thing with Rebels is that there are Mandalorian characters that are very different from the Mandalorian, from Din Djarin and the Mandalorian, and like have a different culture than him. So I'm very curious, and there's almost a setup. So for people that don't know, Mandalorian season 2 has been confirmed that Ahsoka will be in it.
Away.
Oh, that's what that is? was?
Yes.
Oh, because I kept hearing that. Oh, we're gonna get a live action Ahsoka, and then I never cared enough to like
So
figure out for what.
I think there's two
Okay.
parts to it. I think Ahsoka is going to be in Mandalorian, is what was confirmed, and there's also rumors or maybe a confirmation that Ahsoka will be getting her own live action spinoff. Which I'm totally down for because Ahsoka's a fun character, and this is a minor spoiler for the end of Rebels. I'm gonna keep the context out of it just so Alex doesn't get spoiled going in.
Yeah.
The end of Rebels, there is a scene where one of the characters from Rebels and Ahsoka, and this is the epilogue of Rebels, like this is after the story's concluded, they go on a journey together, and the character Ahsoka goes with is a Mandalorian. So I am
The Mandalorian?
super no, not the Mandalorian, but a Mandalorian, like someone from
Okay.
Mandalore with the armor, with the jetpack, all the trappings. I am super curious to find out if, and Alex, you know who the Mandalorian is in Rebels already, like you've seen her, Sabine. I am super curious if we're going to get in Mandalorian season 2 a scene of Sabine Wren from Rebels and Din Djarin interacting with each other because I want to see it so bad.
Oh yeah.
That would be so cool. Yeah. So I think, and that has the potential to happen, which would be awesome.
I'm really happy. I'm really excited to see more like Star Wars media crossover with each other because it feels like they're just barely starting to get into that more.
Well, the cool thing now is like Ahsoka is a character that I think is cool regardless of her backstory,
Hmm.
just because her character design is really good and her like general concept is good. So I don't actually think you need to have seen the Clone Wars to get down with Ahsoka being in something.
Hmm.
It's
The
not
Clone Wars definitely helps because you have background for her, but I think she's cool enough on her own. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes of that. Mandalorian's a good show.
Mandalorian's a good show, man.
Yeah, I think Mandalorians is the Mandalorian's the one thing that we can pretty much unanimously agree on being very high quality,
Yes.
aside from the
I
original trilogy.
I have minor issues like overall, but overall,
Yeah, everyone
I
does, but it's just such a high quality level.
my only issue is that like it's very inspired by westerns, and I get that, but I think the fact that a lot of their episodes are literally just like shot, like not shot for shot, but like very blow by blow the exact story of like other westerns is
Yeah, and I'm pretty
a
sure I
little
forget.
lazy.
There's one episode where they're like helping a village, and it's basically just the story of a western that I've seen. I can't remember if it was Magnificent Seven or not.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
It is okay, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So it is just that story. And the weird thing
Which
is,
it's
it's
fun
also a
episode.
story in the Clone Wars. That same exact setup is a story in the Clone Wars.
Probably because they got it from the same source material.
Same writer, Dave Filoni, right?
Yep. Yep. There you go. And like to be clear, it was a good episode, but in the back of my, it was just
It
distracting
was a
because in
good
the back
episode
of
in the
my
Clone Wars
mind,
too, but like it's just out. It's weird.
I hope the next season they have their own story arcs and not, or like their own plots and just not.
And to be fair, you know what I just realized? Clone Wars did it again. Clone Wars has 2 episodes like
Kidding
that.
me? Oh my god!
Although the second one, which is in the newest season, actually, it is not the primary focus of the episode. It's just kind of it happens at the end where they're retreating to a village
Still.
and they need the help of the villagers to defend themselves.
Still
It's the
though.
same plot. It's fine in all 3 circumstances. It's just we've seen it a bunch. It obviously I think it fits the best in the Mandalorian as a subplot, just because it is like very Western.
I almost feel like that description you just had kind of sums up Star Wars in a lot of ways.
We've seen this 3 times. It's
on their
good all
own,
three
it's fine.
times. But like
It's it's fine on its own. It's just we've seen it 5 or 6 times.
yeah, so I think this is pretty much the end of our discussion on Star Wars media for now. I think at some point I definitely want to have a second podcast talking about Rebels specifically. Just because I think it's super interesting. Games, that's my next topic. I think next week we're probably going to be talking about Star Wars games, or sooner, depending on like time frame and everything that happens. Star Wars games we've been playing: Jedi Academy, Star Wars Battlefront.
Battlefront 2, yep.
Yep.
Both the new and the old.
and I think we all have opinions on them. The one thing I'll say, there are a lot of good Star Wars games and not very many bad Star Wars games. So play Star Wars games. Fallen Order is really fun.
Yeah.
Battlefront,
It's just a lot of the good ones are older, so you have to be
yeah.
able to put up with, older graphics, janky controls.
But if you
you
want
can
to
get
just
over
play a
that.
game and feel like you're in a Star Wars movie, play Battlefront 2, the new one. It
Yeah.
looks very good.
Oh yeah, and even if you just want to enjoy the sights and sounds and you're getting blown away because it's a multiplayer game, literally just play co-op.
Yeah.
And you can just completely just shut your brain off and enjoy the Star Wars,
Dude, I played a match of co-op, and
scenery.
I was playing as one of the clone troopers, and it was like a fight to get battle through the droids, and it's just an episode of Clone Wars. It's fun.
Oh yeah, it's hard. I was shocked actually. The co-op is like not a cakewalk.
Yeah, it's a good game to pick up, especially because it's very cheap right now.
Oh yeah. But honestly, it's $5. Honestly, wait to see what kind of sale it gets on Star Wars Day. It might honestly be like free to play on Star Wars Day. Who
Yeah,
knows?
who knows? Uh, I think let's give we're gonna go into shoutouts, okay? Now, shoutouts we're gonna do a little bit differently this time. Your shoutouts have to be Star Wars related. They can be good,
Okay.
they can be bad, it can be anything. In fact, you know what? It could also be a joke. So, Alex, what's your
I
Star Wars
already
shout
have
out?
Hmm?
You cut out, Alex.
What?
Oh crap.
What?
Can you hear me
Yep,
again?
yep.
Yep.
We can hear you.
Yep.
Well, I already have mine then.
Go for it.
Hello, Ren, saying more.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So, my shout out, I really love the episode of Star Wars: The Next Generation when Data is a 1920s detective. That's my Star Wars shout out.
Shut up, Ryan. So one of my favorite memories of all time is getting premiere tickets to The Force Awakens opening night with my uncle, who's a bigger Star Wars nerd than I am, and we were literally sitting in the seats. We both of us were actually crying because we were so excited and happy to be watching a Star Wars movie theater because it's the first Star Wars movie I ever saw in a theater, and it made me so happy. So yeah.
Oh, I thought there was going to be like a punchline at the end of that, and then it was just a nice story.
No, yeah, yeah. It's one of my greatest like memories, which feels really lame now that I say it out loud like that. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm also going to recommend everyone should play Jedi Academy at least once.
Yes. No. Agreed.
Yeah, very good game. And yeah, with that, I think we're pretty much concluded for this week. Expect us to do another Star Wars thing soon because we have a lot to talk about that we didn't get to, and Star Wars is a fun thing to talk about. So have a good week, everybody. Good May the 4th be with you. Yada yada.
Good.
I just lost the confidence in that statement halfway through
That was
it.
like you dropping like a glass, and then you're like desperately fumbling around trying to like keep it from hitting the ground.
Look, I was
Just
paying
barely
with
snatching it up.
I was paying with the Mon Cala coins, right? It's like when you're in the Mandalorian, and instead of being handed real money, you're handed what look like Pepto Bismol, but it's money. All right, everybody, have a good week.
See ya.